Hi, this is Graham and I do hope everyone's having a great day. And welcome to the fifth in this series of tutorials covering the Pansonic Lumix FZ200 camera. In today's video I want to particularly look at shooting video with this camera. I'll be looking at setting up the IA mode, which is the simplest way to shoot video, but more importantly looking at the creative video mode. In the creative video mode you've got all the manual facilities to set this camera up for recording some great video. In addition, I'll be looking at using external microphones with the camera to give you better audio tracks with your productions, and also some simple lighting that you might want to employ if you don't have enough ambient light to give you the correct exposures. Also in that section I'll be looking at shooting with the correct manual white balance, as often mixing light sources can give you rise to problems in video. So I'll be looking at how to set a manual white balance and how to customize that if you want to change the actual hue of the color. I'll also be looking at some of the mechanics of shooting video, whether we should be using a tripod or a small dolly or even a small camera crane to give us some motion in our video, which will set yours apart from anyone else's. Okay, let's begin by looking at how to set up this camera for the intelligent auto mode to shoot video, and then we'll move on to the creative video modes. Let's begin by looking at shooting video in the IA mode. In particular, I'd recommend you use the IA Plus mode, as the IA Plus mode gives you access to two additional controls. To begin, we turn the top control dial to the IA position, and that's of course mimicked on the LCD screen. And to get into the IA Plus mode, we need to use the menu set button to access the general setup menu. Cursor to the right, and then that gives you access to the Intelligent Auto Plus mode. Press the menu set button and you return to the main shooting screen. And now you can see the three controls. The first one is the background defocus, which allows you to set the aperture to give you the depth of field you require. We have the exposure value compensation, so that if the camera isn't getting the exposure correct, for in this example, we have a black background which is forcing the camera to make the exposure too light. And we have the color correction, so we can make the scene warmer or colder depending on our preferences. The next thing to consider is the recording format, and we have two formats to choose from. One is the AVC HD and the other is the MP4, and the decision will be based on really how you want to use the file afterwards. If you're just going to play the file back from your camera through an HDMI cable to your television, then I would suggest you use the AVC HD file, as this gives you the best possible quality. If you want it for editing, particularly on lower spec PCs, then the MP4 format is probably better for you, as it requires a less powerful PC. AVC HD is a compressed format which requires quite a bit of computing power to decompress and display the file. So you may struggle if you've got a lower spec PC to be able to play or even edit this format. I'm going to select AVC HD, and I'm going to select the highest frame rate and the highest video frame size this camera will give me. So if I go into the menu set option again and we cursor down till we get through to the motion picture menu, cursor to the right, and that gives us the option of changing between AVC HD and MPEG-4. If I select AVC HD, then I pair that with the recording quality, and again cursoring to the right gives me the option of shooting in PSH, which is the 1920 by 1080, 50 or 60 frames progressive recording, dependent on the region you bought the camera in. The next option is the FSH, which is again full HD, but this time it gives you an interlaced format. And again, if you're shooting motion video, it's preferable to shoot in a progressive format than an interlaced format, as the interlaced format will pick up any subject movement between frames, and you may see this as ghosting. The third option is the standard 720p mode. So I'm going to select PSH, which gives me the full 1920 by 1080 50p mode at the highest possible bitrate. If I wanted to select MP4, then of course go to the record mode, cursor to the right and then down to MP4, and then pair that with the recording quality. Cursor to the right, you have the option of Full HD, which is a 1920 by 1080 at 25 frames per second. You have the HD, which is the 720 progressive, again at 25p, and a legacy format of the 640 by 480. So if you just wanted standard definition video, you could shoot in VGA. I recommend you use the FHD if you are shooting MP4, as this will give you the highest bitrate and the best quality of video. So I'll just go back and select AVC HD, and now we're ready to shoot. So normally all you have to do to start recording is press the record button on the top of the camera. I'll take a few seconds of video to get a benchmark. So you can see the camera is now displaying we are recording, the fact that we're recording to the memory card, and the remaining time indicator. The camera will record for 29 minutes 59 seconds, or if you're in MPEG 4, when you reach the 4 GB limit. At that point the camera will stop, and then you just need to press the record button to continue with the next clip. I'm now going to make an exposure value compensation to make the background even darker. To do that, I need to come into the menu which adjusts the three parameters, and that is accessed by pressing in the top control dial here. So when I press that in, it gives me access to exposure value compensation, background defocus and color hue. So I'm going to make the background darker by moving the exposure value compensation towards the minus, and again you can use the navigation button or the control wheel dependent on your preference. So I'm happy with that situation, and I'm now going to apply a little bit of color bias to make the scene warmer. So I'm going to move the set point towards the warm end of the spectrum and press menu set to come back to the shooting menu, and again I'll take a few seconds of video just to record that change so you can see the difference. So we've seen the process now of how to record video in the IA mode, and in the Intelligent Auto mode, as with the still picture mode, the camera will set the appropriate scene type to try and get the best quality of video for you. So you will see this icon change dependent upon the type of scene you're shooting. So in this case it's switched to a portrait mode, but you could see low light or landscape, depending again upon your particular scene type. Let's now look at shooting video if you're in the stills mode. If you're in the P, A, S or M modes, then you can use the record button to grab a video clip without leaving the PASM setup. So for example, if I'm in the P mode and shooting still pictures, and I realise I want to capture some video, all I have to do is press the video record button on the top of the camera, and the camera will immediately switch into video. You do have the option of using exposure value compensation in the PAS mode, so if I wanted again to make this subject darker, I can use the exposure value compensation gained access by the back control dial, and again I'm going to make it slightly darker by going to -2 EV, and then again when I record video, the camera will bring that through to the video and make that exposure value change for you. You can shoot video from the scene types again, so if you wanted to set up for a particular scene, when you go into video you will transfer those settings into the video parameter. So for example, if I wanted to take a landscape sequence, I'll switch to the landscape scene mode, and now when I record video it will use that setting to record the video, and you can see that the landscape icon has appeared on the screen to confirm that I'm actually shooting with the landscape parameters. You can also use the creative mode to apply some artifacts to the video. If I turn the top control dial to the creative mode, we'll gain access to those filters. Well, first of all, look at the expressive color, and again if I select that, you'll notice that we've got an additional parameter we can control using this top control dial. So if I push that in, it gives me exposure value compensation, amount of background defocus, and the adjustment to the amount of color that's in the scene. So it's muted colors or vibrant colors. So if I move it over to the muted colors, we get a desaturated look. If I move it over to the right hand side, we get more of an intense look. So I'll select the center point, confirm with menu set, and I'll just record a few seconds of video just to show you the effect that that filter has on the video. And by going into the menu, we have the retro effect, high key or low key, and low key emphasizes the darks in this subject. So this might be a suitable candidate for applying low key to it. So I'll select that, and again you've got access to additional controls. Push in the top control dial, and again you've got exposure value compensation, background defocus, and this control here, which will change the color balance between a warm tone and a cooler tone. So I'm going to make this picture slightly warmer. So I'm going to go to the left hand side, press menu set to set those parameters in, and we'll record the video. So it's made emphasis on the darker tones and bias the tone curve towards those dark areas. We have the sepia control, which again is a nice effect to apply. So I'll just select that. And again, if you look at the options, you have the contrast control. So you either have a lower contrast or higher contrast. So I'm going to shoot this with the highest contrast to emphasize the filter. Menu set to lock that in, and then just record a few seconds of video to show in the tutorial. You have black and white, impressive art, high dynamic, which emphasizes the bright areas of the scene, and the cross-process look. It's almost as though you've processed your negative film in reversal chemistry. So if we select this, and again we've got access to additional parameters, so you can have a green effect, a cyan, yellow or red effect. So if we go for the red effect and I select OK, I'll just record a couple of seconds of video in that just to show how the cross-process filter works. There are a couple of the filters which don't work in video. The toy effect does work as that gives you a vignetting around the outside edge. The miniature effect works in video to give you these diorama effects. Soft focus doesn't work in this particular mode. And the star filter again can't be applied in the video mode. If you try to record, you see you cannot record this picture in this mode. So that is the creative mode. Let's now look at the most useful mode for shooting video with this camera, and that's in the creative movie mode. And that's accessed by turning the top control dial until you reach the camera with the M symbol. Immediately you do that, you've got the options here now to shoot with a semi-automatic P mode, the aperture priority, so you'll determine the aperture the camera will use, or shutter priority, again you'll set the shutter speed dependent on how much subject movement you have. Or we have the full manual mode, which gives you access to ISO, shutter speed and aperture, and then the final option is the high speed video option. In the P mode, the camera is basically using the intelligent auto settings and then will allow you to record video with those. So with whatever exposure value compensation you've got applied at the moment, that will be transferred through to the video. And that is controlled again by the top control dial. If you depress it in until you find you've got control by the indication of the, and again if you press the control in and you see your control has turned yellow, then that means you've got control of the exposure compensation. And again I want it to be slightly darker as this dark background is influencing the effect on the video. And to record video again, you simply press the record button on the top of the camera. If you've got a wired remote control, then if you plug that into the remote socket on the side of the camera, as I'm illustrating here, then you can take control of recording without having to press the top button by merely using the button on your remote control. In this particular instance, I've got the control taped to the arm of the tripod head so that I can control the video start and stop by just using the button on the arm. And I can start and stop the video without depressing the button on the top of the camera, which is a useful feature. So if you have a wired remote control, it's of benefit in shooting video. Again, you have control of the ISO. So here I've got the ISO set to 3200 just to show you the amount of noise that's in the video. I'll first of all boost that to the 6400 level, and again I'll make sure that we're in focus, and I'll start the video recording. So the video is now being recorded using the ISO 6400, and I select a lower ISO. We'll go to ISO 100, and again I'll start the video recording, and we can see the effect of ISO 100 versus ISO 6400. And you'll probably notice in the video that the 6400 is more noisy, so there's more background noise appearing in the video, which gives you this disturbance of the video, and it gives you a desaturated and lower contrast image. So with ISO 100 you've got the best image possible with the camera. You've got the highest fidelity in terms of color and saturation. If you wanted to manually set the aperture for a specific depth of field, then again just cursor down to aperture priority, hit the menu set, and now you've got control of the aperture with the top control dial. So you can see that the scene is terrifically underexposed because the aperture is at f11. If I dial in a larger aperture, that's a smaller number, then you will see that the image will be displaying the exposure at the change to the aperture. So with f2.8 and ISO 100 I've got a reasonable exposure, and I'll just hit the record button so we can see that in the video. Alternatively, if you wanted shutter priority to capture fast movement, then you can use the shutter priority, and that gives you access now to the minimum shutter speed at the moment is 1/30th of a second, although if you switch to manual focus you can go down to 1/8 of a second. And by using the 1/8 of a second of manual focus you can actually get some night scenes with ISO 100. Providing there's no subject motion, you'll capture enough light to give you some great video. But to capture fast motion I want to use a shutter speed of say 1/250th of a second. So I dial in 1/250th on the camera, but now notice that the subject has gone dark, so I'd have to apply either exposure value compensation if I was close enough, or I'd have to change my ISO to give me the correct exposure. So in this instance I'm going to change the ISO, and again I'll cursor down to +2 stops, which is 100 to 200 and then 200 to 400, and evaluate the scene again. So by increasing the ISO by 2 complete stops, we've got the exposure back to where I think it should be. But again, I'm using the -2/3 EV to prevent the black background going grey or this model going too bright. So if I just shoot a couple of seconds of video in the shutter priority mode with the shutter speed set to 250. In the last option, the full manual mode, we gain complete and independent control of the aperture, the shutter and the ISO, and we get an exposure meter which tells us the level of exposure. So again, selecting the aperture or selecting the shutter is your call. If I wanted to get a little bit more depth of field, I might want to shoot at f4. So I'm going to change first of all the aperture to f4. So I just depress in the dial until the control turns yellow, and then I can use the top control dial to dial in f4. Now that I've got f4 dialed in, you can see that I've got underexposure as the metering scale is showing me. So I can either make the shutter speed longer, so I go to a lower fractional number, or I can increase my ISO. So my best choice is to use the shutter control and make this fractional number smaller, which lengthens the time. So if I press the top control dial in to gain control of the shutter speed, I will now turn the control dial to the left to make the fractional number smaller, which increases the exposure. And again, I'll judge that to be the best exposure. You notice that the camera scale is showing me that I'm slightly underexposed, but it's taken into consideration the black background. So this is where your knowledge of exposure value compensation comes in, and you achieve that by setting an aperture or shutter speed to give you the desired exposure value compensation. And it's transferring through whichever ISO value I've got on here. So again, if I change the ISO to ISO 100, which is the equivalent of 2 stops, to gain the same exposure I'll have to reduce this f-stop by 2 f-stop increments. So if I gain control of the shutter, I go down from f5.6 to f4 and then f4 down to f2.8, which gives me the same exposure. Eagle-eyed viewers might have noticed that I'm actually using a custom white balance here. This is indicated by the 1 and the 2 symbols underneath it, which means that in the white balance settings, which is gained access by the navigation button, I'm using my white set 1 component, which I previously set to get the right color balance. Normally, if the camera is set to auto white balance, it will do a fairly good job, and especially if your light source is anything like daylight or close to one of the presets the camera can use. So it's using any white in the scene to try and drive the camera to a neutral white balance point. I'll take a few seconds of video in the auto white balance mode, and then I'll show you the difference when we've done a manual white balance set. So this is video shot in the manual white balance with auto white balance set. I'm now going to use one of the presets, and I'm filming this using a daylight fluorescent light. So if I use the white balance and go down for daylight, that should give me somewhere near the correct color temperature. You can see that the whites look fairly neutral, and again I'll record just a couple of seconds in the video using the sunny preset white balance. But the best method, if you can use it, is the manual white balance set. And to do that, you either need a neutral grey piece of card or a white sheet of paper to set the white set point. There is a disadvantage in using the white paper in bright sunshine, as the camera might not be able to correct for the amount of light coming into the camera. So in that case, you need to find a neutral subject. To gain access to the manual white set, it's accessed through the white balance control and cursor down until you see white set 1 or white set 2. For this purpose, I'll use the white set 2. And to set the white point, we need to cursor to the right, which gives us access to a target. And we must fill that target with either neutral grey or white for the camera to operate. I carry a set of 3 cards. One is black, one is white, and one is neutral grey, and I use those for the purpose of setting white balance. So basically we cover the target with either the grey card or the white piece of paper, and then press the menu set button, and that forces the camera to make an exposure and adjust the white balance in one move. If I remove the card now, you'll see that the camera has set the white balance, and I'll just shoot a few seconds of video so we can compare that to the auto white balance. So this is manual white set 2 with grey card. If you wanted to fine tune this set point, then again you have access to a matrix which allows you to change the colour between amber and blue and magenta and green. So again, going to the white balance control, cursor to the right to get you to the set point, and then cursor right again, and that gives you the white balance set point adjust. So we have magenta, green, amber, blue. So if you wanted to make the scene more yellow, you would move the control point towards the A. If you wanted to make it more green, you would move it towards a green. If I wanted to apply a bit of redness to this scene, I need to go in the amber, magenta, as they give you the red component. Magenta and yellow give you red. So I'm going to go down 2 clicks in the magenta and across 2 clicks in the yellow. So I'm giving 2 components of red to the scene. Then press the menu set And again, I'll just take a couple of seconds of video so we can see the difference in that white set point. So that manual control is great if you're finding that the color rendering isn't quite correct. So you may, for example, in still mode be shooting flash and find that your flash pictures are coming out too blue, or they are not the correct color tone. We could use the white balance fine control to change the flash setup. The focus modes are still active in video recording, and if you wanted to use manual focus, then you can use manual focus, or you can use the AFS to set the initial focus, and then the camera won't change during the video sequence. Again, you can gain access to the autofocus control by using the quick menu. If I go press the quick menu and cursor down, I can use continuous autofocus or single point autofocus. If I select single point autofocus, then when I start the video, the camera will use the initial set point for the focus and won't change. So if I start the video and then move this little figurine towards the camera will stay locked to the initial focus point. So if I move the little figurine towards the camera and hold it steady, the camera hasn't refocused on the subject. So it allows you to set up the camera, get your initial focus right, and then the focus won't change. If I wanted to track the focus, then I can either use the AFF or the AFC modes. And again, you can use the quick menu to gain access to the two controls. If I use AFC, which is the continuous autofocus, and set that, now when I go into the video mode, you'll notice that if I bring the model closer, the camera will refocus. If I move it back, again you will notice the camera will refocus. So the autofocus is working in the video mode. Unfortunately, in the manual focus mode, you can't change the focus once the camera is recording video. It's a shame, but that's the fact of life with the Panasonic bridge camera. It would be nice to be able to change the manual focus while you're shooting video. But you can use this autofocus control to be able to set between one point and another, just as I'm showing you in the video now. It enables you to pick one subject and then focus on another one and allow the camera to drift back into focus to give the effect of doing a fuller focus. Let's now look at some microphone options for giving you better audio with your video recording.